So we finally finished season 1 of The Chosen with our new deep dives, and now we're heading into season 2. This season in particular is by far, I think, my favorite season. And not only that, but I think this season is the most experimental season of The Chosen in general. I think there are so many things that they tried to do within this season that were just so unique and so different than any other show, let alone Christian show, than we had really seen before. And that starts off with this very first episode, with the flash forward of seeing them 15 plus years later at the Shiva of James, which of course we'll get into. And then the other things that they do throughout the season with the one shot and all these different motifs, like episode 4, where there's no dialogue for the first 10 minutes. There's just so many things that are so unique in this season in particular that I think it's just unique. It stands out in the whole landscape of The Chosen seasons 1 through 4, at least right now. Now, episode 1 of season 2 in particular is where we started our original YouTube channel, The Snipe Life, and of course I hold it very dear to my heart. And I think there's so many unique things within this episode that we have to talk about. So let's just jump in. Let's start right here at the beginning of episode 1 of season 2, and yeah, let's get into it. Here we go.
The first time? You know, the first time you were there.
Humor me.
I was out on Andrew's old sloop. I'd had a bad night.
So really amazing opener to the season. I think by far, season 2, episode 1 is the best opening episode to any of the seasons. From season 1 to season 4, this, I think, is the best opener of any of the seasons. And it's such a great hook into the season that it just got me right from the beginning. And I was so excited to dive into this and talk about everything that's going on. So clearly we can see this is inside somewhere, but it's obviously much later in their lives, probably 15 plus years later on. We don't get an exact date in this episode. However, I believe Dallas has talked about it being 15 years later. It's not as far as we've seen in some other locations later on in the show, or like in the messengers or things like that, but it is in that realm of being pretty far down the line here. And so we're seeing obviously Peter here as he's a little bit older, a little bit more gray, a little bit more gristled in the early church here. And so very cool to see. Now we're going to get more clues about why they're here and what's actually happening here as he's talking to John going through this.
At first, I didn't even know it was him. Remember? I thought he was a Roman, about to ruin my life.
And what happened next?
It was at the moment when I thought my career and my reputation were about to be destroyed.
This is such a short line from Thomas, but I think it's so telling, especially if you've seen through season 4, seeing Thomas with this face and then how he ends this small clip here is quite interesting to see. He has like this elation and then his smile fades and he kind of gets really retrospective there, which I think could be telling for the future of the series, obviously, if you've seen that far, but really, really interesting for Thomas in general. Now, this is a brand new character who we have not seen before in the series. I love that they added him in here because it shows the writing style of Dallas and Tyler and Ryan, because these 3 guys are so amazing at what they do when they're writing these scripts. And this showed me that straight from season 2. Of course, we saw it a lot in season 1, but I think season 2, in this moment, I realized, oh, they don't think that I'm dumb. Like, they actually think that I might have read the Bible and that I might have some context clues as to what is actually going on here. They don't have to explain every single little thing, right? They can allow these things to kind of breathe and play out over time, but also, if you're someone that's informed, you can dive deep like we do on this channel and get so much more information out of this moment, right? So our first look at Nathaniel here, we can tell that it's Nathaniel because of the things that he says about Philip and coming and seeing, right? All of these things give us context clues for what is going on here. And so it's really, really cool to see that.
Philip just said, "Come and see." And I did. And look, I don't know how to describe it other than he knew me before he knew me.
I love that line there because there's such a payoff for not only episode 2 of this season, but there's such a payoff for those that have read their scripture, right? If you've read the scripture about Nathaniel, you know exactly what he's talking about, because he said, it's like he knew me before he knew me. And what does that represent, right? It's talking about the tree that he was under. It's talking about how he's like living life and how the scripture talks about this moment with Nathaniel and Jesus as he's called to come and follow him. So beautiful too. Now, a lot of people were confused originally around this section as well, because many people were thinking that Bartholomew was going to be part of the apostles, where in The Chosen, they're deciding that Nathaniel and Bartholomew are the same person, which is generally accepted as how it is in scripture, that some of the gospels call him Nathaniel, some of the gospels call him Bartholomew. And so because of that, they see that he's the same person because he's always named in the same timing. So he's like with the same apostles, for example, with Philip and different things around there, because obviously Philip and him are connected. And so we see Bartholomew and Philip and Nathaniel and Philip kind of connected in the scriptures, which shows us that they are the same person because they're not ever mentioned together, if that makes sense. So that's why Bartholomew, if you didn't know, is not in The Chosen. We don't see him as an apostle in The Chosen because Nathaniel is Bartholomew, if that makes sense. Like a lot of them had different names called throughout time, right? Levi and Matthew, or Judas and Thaddeus, right? These are different names for these different people. Thomas, or known as the twin, right? Different things like that throughout. So anyway, here is Nathaniel, and I love how he was introduced. One of my favorite parts.
I was standing next to John the Baptizer.
What? Creepy John.
And he walked by, like out of nowhere. And John freaked out. He said, "Behold."
I'm eating a new bug.
He was just sitting there.
People were mad about that, by the way. How Peter always like messes with John the Baptist. I've seen people that were mad about that. Like, that's so irreverent. That's so horrible. Why would you treat John the Baptist like that? It's like, it's just a show. It's okay. Definitely a funny moment in my books.
Eating lunch with all the construction workers, cracking jokes.
I was on my way to Jerusalem. I'm sorry. All of this is just, it's difficult to talk about. Yeah, it reminds me of how much I miss him.
But we have to.
I know. I talk about him to others every day.
When I first watched this, for some reason, I didn't recognize Jordan. He looked so much different to me. And so I didn't know that this was little James until I watched it, I think, a second time. And then I realized, oh, that's just little James. I swore, I was like, is this like supposed to be Luke or someone else who's involved now, 14, 15 years later? So, but no, obviously it's little James here. When I first started kind of breaking down these episodes 3.5 years ago, I didn't obviously recognize the actors as much and different things like that. But yeah, they all look so great as their older selves. I really love it. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this video and you want to see us making more content just like this, then you can help to support us over at snipesupport.com. This is a great place where you can pledge $5, $10, or $25 a month in order to help us to continue to make this level of videos and keep on doing what we do. Oftentimes YouTube is fickle and sometimes it can be scary. Just last week, we saw that the Brosen was completely banned from YouTube and then slowly reinstated over the next day or so. This was terrifying for us because if we get banned or our channel videos get taken down, that means that all the revenue from those videos and everything else is completely shut off for that period of time. And that could be a day or a week or a month, or in some cases I've seen on YouTube, years. And that's terrifying. So we want to be able to diversify and have you guys support our content in other places. Patreon is the best for this. So we'd love for you to go over there at snipesupport.com and sign up if you can. If not, no worries. But over on Patreon, you'll find extra content as well as our full live streams, which are often 3 hours weekly that we post only on Patreon. So anyway, let's get back to the video, but I wanted to thank you for your support and for even watching this video in the first place. Anyway, let's get back to it.
But it's difficult with all of you. It's different with all of you.
Just tell me about the first time you actually saw him.
It was in a tavern. He set his hand on mine. Which isn't what it sounds like. Maybe leave that part out. People will get confused.
I love that section there as well. Mary Magdalene talking about her connection with Jesus from episode 1, clearly when he puts his hand on hers and kind of gets her to not drink the drink. And then she goes outside, drops the drink. They have that whole section there. This is an amazing section here because obviously there have been so many productions in the past that have made Mary Magdalene and Jesus kind of an item. Like they were attracted to each other or they were married or different things like that. And so obviously that was not the case. We don't see that anywhere in scripture at all. And so to have her clarify here, I think was such a good moment of like scriptural clarity as to when she's saying he put his hand on mine. That's not in any way a sexual thing or a desire thing. It's just what happened, right? So she's saying maybe leave that out because that could be misconstrued, right?
I don't know yet what I will be including. I'm just writing it all down.
It was the 4th morning of the 3rd week of the month of Adar.
Of course, Matthew comes in with this heavy detail, right? Let's go back and listen to that one more time.
It was the 4th morning of the 3rd week of the month of Adar.
So it was the 4th morning of the 3rd week of the month of Adar. So this gives us a precise, exact date for whenever Matthew was called, okay? So this is interesting because during my timeline videos that I've done in the past, you know, I've spent months and months researching the timeline for The Chosen. It's very off. It's very different than real life. It's very different than history. However, this was one of the main things that gives me a starting point for a lot of those beginning moments. Much of the time in season 1, we get these timestamps of AD 26, kind of when Jesus' ministry started. However, this gives us an exact date for whenever Matthew was called or whenever he first encounters Jesus. Yeah, this is a very helpful kind of clip when we're talking about the exact timeline of The Chosen here. Yeah.
Sometime during the 2nd hour.
It doesn't have to be precise.
Why wouldn't it need to be precise? Mine will be precise.
My answer might not make sense.
Try me, Mother.
I can hardly remember a time when I didn't know him.
So real quick, obviously the person who's interviewing them is John, and John says, "Try me, Mother," which of course is not only referencing her as the mother of Jesus, but also during Christ's crucifixion, he says, "Son, here is your mother. Mother, here is your son," right? He kind of pairs these two together, John and Mother Mary, so that he can take care of her and make sure that, you know, she's good during this time. Later on, we actually see Mary with Jesus' brothers and sisters in the book of Acts later on. So it doesn't seem like she lives with John for the rest of her life, for example. I know some people do believe that, and if you do, that's fine, whatever. But there's this connection point for sure that Jesus gives to both of them here, that they are that he's supposed to take care of her, at least during that time there. You'll see her reciprocate as well, call him son in a second here.
There's one little kick.
Go on.
My son,
Right there.
why are you doing all this? Why now?
Because we're getting older. And our memories are...
I mean, why now? During Shiva.
Because everyone is here. I need to get their memories.
You need to.
real quick, two things here. I'm going to let it play for a second. Listen closely.
Mourn Big James.
So I'll rewind that one
Everyone
more
is
time.
here. I need to get their memories.
You need to mourn Big James.
So this line was actually changed from the original line. The original line was way more ambiguous. So instead of Mother Mary saying, you need to mourn Big James, originally in the show, the line was, you need to mourn your brother. And it didn't do this thing where it changed camera angles there.
Everyone is here. I need to get their memories.
You need to mourn Big James.
So you can even see in her mouth a little bit before that cut. She says, you need to mourn your brother. And so what she's talking about there, of course, is his actual brother. But because earlier in the conversation, they're saying mother and son, there's almost like this vagueness. So when this episode first aired, most people, I would say probably 80% of people that watched the episode, thought that this was right after the death of Jesus, not the death of Big James, which is actually where we are here. We see that John is accumulating everybody's stories while they're in Shiva, while they're sitting Shiva for Big James. Big James is essentially the first of the apostles to be killed, other than Judas, obviously, who was no longer an apostle at the time of his death. And so Big James was martyred. I believe he was beheaded in 44 AD. So this gives us a almost precise timeline as to where we are in the show as well. So in the show, we know that Jesus will be crucified in AD 30, which is what we've just gotten into in the actual show. AD 30 is there, and then we see that here this is going to be AD 44, so 14-ish years later, depending on, obviously within that 14th year later on. And so we see as they're coming back for this Shiva, and Big James is now dead, they're starting to realize, oh, well, by this time Stephen has died. Now Big James is dead. There's other people within the early church that have been killed, I'm sure. Saul at this point is hunting down those people. There's a lot of stuff that's happening here where it's getting really, really intense for the early church. They're beginning to go in hiding and different things like that as well. John now here is writing down all of the words of the people. We don't know exactly how this happened or how he, accumulated all of these different things. However, we know that a lot of this is eyewitness accounts. John obviously wrote it with his own hand. We see this at the end of John as well, as he talks about these different things, which we'll get into in a bit in the scripture. But we see that John is gathering all of these stories and doing all of these things. Why didn't he do this earlier on? This is 14 years later, right? And we know that all of the apostles, for example, started writing and gathering all this information a bit later after Jesus' death and resurrection. And the main reason for this is because they didn't know when Jesus was coming back. When Jesus says, I'm going to leave and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to have my second coming, all this stuff is going to happen, they did not understand that this wasn't like 3 weeks from now. They didn't understand that it was like 5 years from now. They didn't understand that it was like 500 years from now. They didn't understand that it was like 2,000 years from now, right? They did not understand when this was going to take place. And so because of that, why would they write stuff down? What would be the purpose of that? They could just tell everybody what they saw. They could be witnesses of the event, right? However, once they started getting older, once they saw that the apostles were dying, they started getting worried and they started to realize, oh no, we have to be the people that like write all this stuff down. We have to be the people that actually make sure that everybody knows what's going on here, right? And so they began writing down all of this stuff and accumulating all of this knowledge and putting it into these gospels. And so Matthew wrote a gospel, John wrote a gospel, Mark wrote his gospel with the help of Peter, because Peter was his kind of mentor or his rabbi, right? We also see that Luke wrote a gospel, obviously. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John become our 4 gospels that are all intertwining and telling the story of the good news. And so that is like all of these things are kind of, being accumulated over time. And so that's what we're seeing here is John putting together his gospel, getting all these stories in order, putting the things in that he wants to put in and telling the story that he wants to tell. Every single gospel has a unique way of telling the story of the gospel. John is very, very specific in how he talks about things. He's very poetic in how he talks about things. Matthew tells it in a different way. He's telling these stories, and he's kind of detailed in these stories that he's talking about, but primarily he's trying to tell the story of how Jesus is the Messiah, and he's making that very clear through genealogies and different things like that. We see that Luke and Mark are like, they're pulling things from different gospels, but they're also telling their own version of it and having their own purposes for these gospels as well. So it's important to know the context of what we're talking about when we talk about these gospels as well. We can't just dive in and say that each of them is the exact same thing like we often think that they are. They each have their own purpose, and they're told by the people who wrote them, right? And so that's what we're seeing John do here, which I love. Love this. Also, I believe that we've been told the costuming here, this neck piece right here, I believe is a piece of Big James' tunic that John took off and put it on his own in order to remember his brother here, which is very, very cool as well.
He won't be the last of us this happens to. Who knows when I will see the others again, or if. I'm not in a hurry to write a whole book, but I do want to get the eyewitness stories now, while we're together.
Isn't Matthew going to write something?
He's only writing about what he saw, and about what Jesus told him directly. But I was there for things that Matthew doesn't know about.
I don't know if that's 100% true. I don't think Matthew wrote only about what he saw, because Matthew doesn't even get called until later in the book of Matthew, like after the Sermon on the Mount, I believe. And so it's interesting to see that story, unless it's not in chronological order, which is also very possible. It's a very Jewish way of storytelling. They don't often put things in chronological order. They talk about things in a way that will tell the best story and to make it most impactful. So Matthew could be writing in that sense, and he was there for all the earlier stuff, but I don't know if that's 100% true, that Matthew was only writing about stuff that he was there for, that Jesus told him directly, unless Jesus told him all the earlier stuff directly. I don't know. Anyway.
I was in his inmost circle. He loved me.
He loved all of you. You just feel the need to talk about it more often.
So, of course, John says that he loved me because in John's gospel, he talks about himself. Oftentimes, he doesn't use the name John, right? He just says the one who Jesus loved, right? Or the beloved disciple. And so that's how he refers to himself in the gospel. So that's how they added it here. I thought that was great.
I prefer to treasure these things in my heart. You know that if you tried to write every single thing he did, the world itself could not contain the books that would be written.
A disclaimer. That's good. I'm going to say that.
I love that they added that as well. We'll jump into some scripture here. We see this at the end of John. This is the very last thing that's written in the book of John. Now, there were also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So this is what Mother Mary kind of gives to him there. Of course, that's not scriptural that she gave it to him, but he did write that in his book. And so quite interesting. This last section here is actually Jesus talking to the beloved disciple, who is John. And then it kind of connects that to, this is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things. In other words, writing this book that you're reading, and who has written these things. And we know that his testimony is true. So yeah, interesting. The book of John obviously always comes back to this here and saying that this is what John wrote down, but Jesus did many, many, many more things. And those things are very important for sure. So continue.
You see, Mother, if I do not write these things down, they will be lost to history. James would agree.
Again, talking about Big James, his brother who has just died.
Where will you start?
In the beginning, naturally. I'm just, not sure which beginning.
His birth,
Earlier.
his ancestry.
I'm pretty sure Matthew has that covered. But
Very true. Very true.
Maybe the prophecies, the promise to Abraham.
I thought about starting with Abraham, but still so much came before him.
What was before Abraham?
Noah,
And before him?
a garden.
Well, you could start there.
But I wanted to be known that he was much more than what can be seen or touched. What was before the garden? In the beginning, the earth was formless and void.
Yeah, so the Gospel of John. Oh, nice freeze frame there, right in the lightning strike. The Gospel of John is really focused on proving that Jesus is God. The Gospel of Matthew is really focused on proving that Jesus was the one to come, so the Messiah, right? So not that these two things are dissonant in any way, they're both true, and both of these people understood both of these things to be true, but John was very focused on showing that Jesus was God throughout the beginning of his gospel. That's why they're having this conversation here. He wants to go back to the very beginning. He wants to show that Jesus was more than just the Messiah, more than just a great prophet, more than just this dude that came and changed everything. He was God. And there's so much to that. And how is it best that he could explain that? Really, really cool stuff.
Cannot hear it without thinking of you two.
Referencing the Sons of Thunder there, which happens later in this episode. We're not really going to look at that scene, but yeah, very cool connection there throughout this entire beginning section and the end section.
I cannot believe how much he put up with. Others, they will not even remember the sound of his voice. They'll just be words.
He said they weren't just words, remember? Heaven and earth will pass away.
But my words will never pass away.
They're eternal.
Love that connection point. The writing there, perfect. My words will never pass away. And then this connects John to the word in Greek, which we'll get to in a second.
You think of something. Take your time. I'm off to bed.
Yep. Beautiful moment there. I love that section. Absolutely. Now at the end here, I wanted to check out just this moment right before the end and getting into the end here.
Here they are. In proper order. Parasite in the beginning. Shemot, names. Vakira, and he called. Bamidbar, in the desert. And Devon, words.
All right, so real quick, what he's talking about here is this guy that we're seeing in this section right here. He is the high priest of this area, essentially, of Sychar, the city that they're in. This is a Samaritan city, and the Samaritans believed only in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is the Pentateuch, okay? What they said is their Torah, right? So what he is saying here is basically, I want you to pick any book that we have and go into whatever you need to, but he is only talking about the first 5 books, or the law of Moses, essentially, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that's how we say them. However, they have different names, obviously, in Hebrew. The first one is Bereshit, which means in the beginning. It's just the first words of that book. That's kind of the beginning of everything. Obviously, we know Genesis. Shemot is the next one, which means names, which is what he says there. The names are referring to the sons of Israel, how all of that happened, how the Exodus happened, obviously, all that kind of stuff. Vaikra, Vaikra. I always can't pronounce that one, but it's basically in English, it's translated to "and he called." And this is primarily connected with the laws regarding worship and all those different kinds of things throughout. Then we have Numbers, which is Bemidbra, and this is in the wilderness in English there. Then we have Deuteronomy, which is Devarim, and this is words, which again connects to John, and I love how they do that as well. Words mostly refers to here the words of Moses, as a lot of this book is different speeches and things like that are from Moses specifically. And so, yeah, that's Deuteronomy, Devarim there. So that's what he's saying here as he goes through this section. I'll kind of rewind it so you guys can hear it again as he goes through.
Up in order. Bereshit in the beginning. Shemot, names. Vakira, and he called. Bamidbar, in the desert. And Devarim, words. I will leave you to make your selection in private.
Thank you. Gershom,
Yes, Rabbi.
can you send in my disciple John, please?
Of course.
Love this section here. I love this set as well. Over on the wall over there, you can kind of see like a seraphim type figure that's there. We see this figure oftentimes associated with the Ark of the Covenant. And so I wonder if that's kind of what it's going towards. Obviously, purple would be a very rare fabric, very expensive fabric during that time. So it's very ornate in this synagogue in particular. But the imagery that we're seeing on these different curtains here reminds me a lot of the veil in the temple itself, at least what they believe to have it be like. We don't really know what it looked like 100%, but yeah, it reminds me a lot of that. So very cool set decoration there.
The 5 books of Moses, and no more.
They're missing out on so much.
Yes. But we have to start somewhere. What do you think I should read? Maybe Moses striking the rock instead of speaking to it. Or Balaam hitting his donkey when he was mad.
Don't torment me.
How about when Moses broke the tablets? Jonathan storming away from the dinner table. Samson striking down the men of Ashkelon. Oh, wait. They don't have those scrolls.
I get it.
So all those stories are in the scrolls after the first 5 books of the Bible. So he's kind of poking fun at them a little bit.
I get it.
I really am open to suggestions for the reading.
I couldn't. After today, after yesterday, I do not feel very much worthy.
Who's worthy of anything? You?
But no man, apparently.
I'm a man, John.
This is one of the things in season 2 that I was like, I wonder how much John actually knows. Because I don't think that he would have a full understanding, especially this early on in the ministry, that Jesus was anything but a man. I think he probably would have believed that he was a man that was from God, that was Messiah, but I don't think that he would have fully understood that Jesus was actually God. Because even later on in the ministry, they had a really, really hard time grasping that. So it's funny to me to see John have such a grasp on that here, saying that, you know, basically differentiating him from being a man.
And yet,
Love this.
I am who I am.
And of course, this references the burning bush, right? With Moses in that time talking to the literal God and God saying, I am that I am. I am who I am. And so Jesus saying this is not just a saying that he is who he, it's not just saying he is who he is. It's not just saying like he's not just calling himself special or the Messiah or anything else. He is literally in this sentence claiming to be God, which is why John reacts the way that he does in this moment. Even when Jesus is being arrested, we see him repeat part of this phrase, I am, right? And in that moment, the ground shakes and everybody falls to the floor. They're pushed to the ground because of the power of his proclamation that he is God. Not just that he is the Messiah, not just that he's the special prophetic figure, but that he is God. And so I love that they have this moment here.
Have you made your selection, Rabbi? Rabbi?
Almost. Sorry. Almost. They're getting restless out there.
So, do you have a favorite passage from the first 5?
Do you?
I don't know. I like them all.
You don't say. I suppose I love the beginning. I love how God simply spoke and the world came into being.
Yes. As David wrote, by the word of the Lord,
The heavens were made.
Yep, this comes from Psalm 33. So by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. This is perfect because it's going to connect directly to the book of John in a second here. But we'll get back to that in a second. Such a great, great moment.
You know, the Greeks use word to describe divine reason, what gives the world form and meaning.
So this, we're going to dive into this in a second, but I want you to hold on to this thought, okay? The Greeks use the word as something that kind of forms the world, okay? So you can think of this in modern terms. There's a lot of scientific thinking folks that will say the same thing, right? They won't use the word, but they'll use science or they'll use some other thing to explain this thing, right? Physics, for example. There is an order to the universe that controls everything, and we live within that system of order, okay? That is how the word in Greek, logos, word kind of works. So we're going to dive deep into that in a second. Just hold on to that thought, okay?
I like that. And it is a favorite memory.
Love that he says that too. It's a favorite memory. It's not a favorite story. It's not a favorite passage. It's not a favorite scroll. It's a favorite memory. And then, of course, we have Jesus coming in here to read the scroll. We're going to fast forward a little bit here for copyright music stuff. We see Malak coming back in, who was healed earlier on in the episode. We see him sitting down and getting ready to listen.
A reading from the first scroll of Moses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
In the beginning was the Word.
So, of course, what we're hearing here is the very beginning of Genesis and the very beginning of the book of John. And this is really important because as we look at the book of John, we see that it mirrors the book of Genesis very importantly and very purposefully, right? John isn't just flippantly doing this and writing in the beginning, right? He's using that phrase very purposefully to have you go back to Genesis and compare these things, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, all things made through him, and without him, not anything was made, right? That was made. So this connects, this line right here, verse 3, all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made, right? This connects directly to Psalm 33 as well, which we just saw 5 seconds ago in the episode, right? By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. So this is linking not only back to God, not only back to logos, or the word, which is word in Greek, like I said, but also back to Jesus as the creator God, right? As the creator being who everything was made through, okay? So going through Genesis and having this connecting moment is one of the most brilliant pieces of writing that we see in The Chosen in its entirety. It's so amazingly well done. And of course, everybody knows, if you're a biblical scholar or someone who's been around that area, that John chapter 1, of course, connects to Genesis. But the way that they did this in this episode is just so beautiful. So let's go through this some more, and we're going to really deep dive into Logos here and some connecting points to who Jesus actually is. It's so, so good.
And the earth was void and without form.
And the Word was with God.
And the darkness covered the face of the deep.
And the Word was God.
Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
He was in the beginning with God.
The light.
All things were made through him, and without him
Then God separated.
was not anything made that was made.
I love the one tier. I wonder what George is thinking about in this moment, just as an actor, you know. But obviously, beautiful moment for sure.
In him was life, and the life was the light of men.
So light is a really big portion of John's gospel. And of course, that connects again with the beginning of Genesis as God creates light, right? It's this big moment where God is creating something out of nothing, right? And so John uses this term, this light, to encapsulate all of the good, all of the godly things on earth. And to encapsulate how we should be acting as Christians, and a lot of different things throughout his gospel, right? Basically, are you following the light or are you following the darkness? And having that juxtaposition throughout his gospel is a really key part of it.
The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
Beautiful episode. Let's dive into this though, because I want to talk about Logos. So earlier, when we're in this scene here with Jesus and Jonathan, with Jesus and John, he talks about this word Logos, right? Which is Greek for the word word. When we see this word at the beginning of John, in the beginning was the word. In Greek, as it's written in the original manuscripts that we have, this word is logos, okay? But in the Greek culture, the word was not just word, okay? The logos really pertained to the systems of the world, okay? So there was this unseen, unknown system that created everything and helped to organize everything, okay? And that was a Greek kind of philosophical understanding that they had, okay? We're going to make a really big connection here, so don't go anywhere. Here we see that John is seeing Logos, and he's seeing that it's connected to Jesus in his gospel, right? In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. He was in the beginning with God. So he's now giving Logos a gender, right? He's giving Logos a form. He's giving Logos a way of being, okay? So that people who saw this, especially Greeks who saw this, would understand who this person is, what this thing is that John is talking about. Now, as I was reading this and as I was preparing for kind of deep diving into this, I couldn't shake off my mind the fact that we could connect this to another huge biblical moment with a whole nother biblical person, and that is Paul. So if we look in Acts 17, we see that Paul addresses the Areopagus. This is in Athens, okay? You can go to this location today. The Areopagus is a place where all these philosophers would sit around and they would talk basically, and discuss and debate and fight about these different things that were going on in the universe, okay? They would fight about gods and goddesses. They would fight about, physics and different things that were happening in the earth. Why do these things happen the way that they do? Now, there was a bunch of different stuff around the Areopagus, or you might know this place better as Mars Hill. This is in Athens here. And we see that Paul has this discussion with the men of Athens who clearly are not followers of Christ. Most of them are not Jewish, right? And so we see as Paul talks to them, he says, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious, for I have passed along and observed the objects of your worship. I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything." So we connect these two moments of thought, right? These Greek men who are in the Areopagus, they're on Mars Hill, they're in this place of debate. They have an altar with an inscription that says, "To the unknown God." The unknown God is worshipped, as Paul says here, as a God that made everything, that is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples from Paul's understanding, right? And so here we can connect these two things. The Logos is almost the unknown God that they worshiped and served here in the Areopagus. So we connect the Logos, who is the thing that makes everything run, right? It's the thing that makes everything work in the universe. It is this overarching physics and science and understanding, and everything is ordered by the Logos. And yet the Greeks worship this unknown God that's not named, right? It's to the unknown God, to this being who created everything and has this ability and is connecting everything and organizing everything. And so in a lot of ways, we can even connect this to modern day, right? Where there are so many people who rely on, there is this understanding that the world works in a certain way. However, I still believe there is no God, right? And yet they still operate in this understanding that gravity exists, that physics exists, that humans are humans and we are not animals. We are not rocks. We are not waterfalls, right? This light is a light, right? These things work in an ordered way. If I light a candle on fire, it will go on fire until a certain amount when that energy is expelled, right? If I cook this meat, there's a time when it's unsafe to eat and a time when it's safe to eat. How does it rain? How do plants grow, right? There are so many questions that we cannot answer as human beings. I cannot make a plant grow, but I can give it the things that it needs in order to grow, right? This is the Logos. This is the understanding of the universe. And so when John uses this term Logos, he is connecting it to the God of the Greeks, right? One of the gods of the Greeks that is kind of in order of everything, if that makes sense. It's this philosophical truth that they believed, that everything has an order and everything works in this way because of the Logos. And so I love the way that John uses it here. I love the way that Paul takes their own thing, right? John with the Logos and Paul with the unknown God, and they both are doing the same thing here. They are both taking this thing that the Greeks love and use and on a daily basis worship, and they are bringing it back to the truth of what it actually is. And they're using those things to explain who Jesus is. So John 1 is just so amazing. If we continue down in him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John, and of course this goes into the John the Baptist. And then if we continue in Acts, we see that Paul does the same thing here. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is served by human hands, although he needed anything, since he himself gives all to mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we are indeed his offspring. So this is such a cool connection point that Paul is making here, but I think that John similarly is doing the same thing in John chapter 1, where he's taking this Grecian idea and he's bringing it into the truth of Scripture. He's bringing it into the truth of who Jesus is. And so I just love that section. I love this whole moment here that that the bookends of this episode, where John is writing his gospel. He's talking about all these future things and what's going on and connecting that back to this moment in the synagogue with Jesus as he's reading Genesis. It's just a beautiful way of connecting all of this and talking about the Logos and talking about who Jesus actually is, that he is God. And that is the purpose of John's gospel, and all of that wrapped up together is some of the best writing that we have in The Chosen overall. I thought it was amazing when I first saw it. I think it's even more amazing now that I have a fuller understanding of it. Yeah, so good. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below of this episode in particular. It's a good one. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you later. Peace.